All right, I'm going to go ahead and get this started. So I just want to tell you guys, how many of you know who Steve Hull is, the Bethesda Magazine director? That's not him, but I'm just asking how many of you guys know him. So Steve Hull and I, we were chatting recently, and he said, I've got to introduce you to Shane Rock.
Oh.
Do you know Shane? And I was like, no. And he said, he's the executive director of Interfaith Works. And I said, well, we have a relationship with Interfaith Works as a church. Can't believe I've never met him. So Shane and I got together at Caldi Coffee House in Silver Spring a few weeks ago, and it was just so incredible for me not only to get to know him as a person, but also to hear about statistics about poverty in Montgomery County, things that I didn't know, and also to hear about just the overwhelming and impressive work that Interfaith Works does, which we'll hear about today as well. So today we're going to get kind of a download from Shane on the kind of poverty in our county and where it started and all that kind of stuff. So we're really looking forward to that. So Shane, with that welcome, let's welcome him together.
Thank you. Thanks. Good morning. It's such a pleasure to be here with you this morning. Thank you. Thanks for showing up even with the topic. I mean, poverty, you hear poverty and you might think that's kind of a downer, right? So I want to start off talking a little bit about what poverty is and give some context for this conversation. One of the things that I think is confusing is we use the word poverty and it's not well defined. And so, and it has different meanings when you're talking about poverty in the world at large and poverty in the United States and poverty in Montgomery County. So I want to talk about that for just a moment and we'll lead you through a few things. And I'm going to ask you a few questions just to get us started, because I want to talk about how we think about statistics and how that informs what we think. So there's this really cool book called Factfulness. Does anyone know about that? No. Okay. It's a great book. And there are a number of questions in that book that challenge our assumptions around what's going on in the world, particularly around poverty and population issues. So we have this question. How many children will there be in the world in the year 2100? In 1950, there were fewer than 1 billion children aged 0 to 14 in the world. By 2000, there were almost 2 billion. How many do UN experts think there will be in 2100? 4 billion, 3 billion, or 2 billion? How many think 4 billion? Okay. About 3 billion. Okay. How many think 2 billion? One person. Well, I think you've got one person who's got some insight into this. And the reason is that population growth is slowing throughout the world. And so the number of children being born decreases per family as the income increases in families in lower income countries. So in agrarian, agriculture-based countries or countries that are struggling with poverty, families tend to have more kids because those kids don't live to adulthood in many cases, and because they need more children to help around with the family's work. So as families become wealthier, they have less kids, and that means that we're going to slow down in terms of world population growth of children. I'm just going to do another one or two of these. We find the right one, and okay, let's do this. What is the average life expectancy at birth in the world today? 50 years, 60 years, or 70 years? How many think 50 years? Okay. How many think 60? How many think 70? Okay, it's almost an even split. That's pretty good. Those of you who thought 70 were right. So we, in the United States, tend to think that life expectancies are lower than they actually are around the world. And it's because we make assumptions about how the world is doing. And I want to show you something really quickly that gives us a little better understanding of how the world is doing in terms of poverty. So if you break income levels across the world into 4 different groups, income level 1 is a family income in US dollars of about $2 a day. In level 2, it's about $4 a day in current dollars. Level 3, it's about $16 a day. In level 4, it's more than that. Okay? In the year 1800, the United States and virtually every country in the world had populations with incomes in today's dollars, where most of the families had incomes below $2 a day. And they were struggling with disease, with poverty, with having adequate shelter, all of those things. But as we move towards the present, watch what happens with all these countries. I'm going to just animate this. Let's see if I can get to work. All it kind of bounces around. There's a little bit of movement into level 2 among some of these countries. The big circle, by the way, is China, the big red circle on the left. So we get up to the 1900s, and I'm going to get back one just for a second. Watch, 1913. Watch, there's going to be a big dip coming up right here. That's World War I. Okay. So life expectancy is plotted on the left, income on the x-axis, life expectancy on the y-axis. So life expectancy is still not going up dramatically, but you see some movement among some of the countries on the right by 1920. Watch what happens as we get further into the 20th century. All these countries in the 1950s and 60s start to move up in income rather dramatically and in life expectancy. So that when we get into, watch, so you see in 2006, the United States is one of these, is that big green circle in level 4. Okay? Our life expectancy is approaching 80. It's over 70 years. All of the countries of the world are starting to move up in income and life expectancy. And it's just accelerating. And I say, I share this with you in part to kind of reset your thinking about poverty and what's going on in the world. What's actually happening is poverty has been halved in the last 40 years worldwide. And it's because of advances in medicine, economic development, and all of these things. And so most people in the world today can take care of their basic needs, so they're not going to die. Their kids are mostly going to live to adulthood. There are very few countries left in income level 1 where they can't find enough shelter, they can't find food to eat. And any sort of changes lead to famine, to death. Most countries are actually doing much, much better than they were even a short time ago. So that's the world. Let's talk about the United States. When we get back to poverty in the US, or when we talk about poverty in the US, we're talking about something a bit different. In the US, we're talking about a state of deprivation, lacking the usual socially acceptable amount of money or material possessions. Okay? So when that graph was really talking about the ability to survive and to be able to grow an economy where people can thrive. In the United States, we're not talking about survival so much because we have government programs and other safety net work that communities do that ensure that people survive, even when they have no income, as in this furlough, right? So in general, we have people taken care of, so they're not dealing with survival issues, they're dealing with deprivation issues. And so in the United States, we're talking about poverty as this sort of idea that we want people to have a basic level of living. Okay? The most common measure of poverty is the poverty threshold set by the US government. The measure recognizes poverty as a lack of those goods and services commonly taken for granted by members of mainstream society. The official threshold is adjusted for inflation using the Consumer Price Index each year. Poverty measures in the US are not estimates of the amount of money people in a household must have to meet their basic needs for food, shelter, clothing, etc. in a given location. That is, there's one poverty level for the United States, and it's not changed based upon where you live. Montgomery County is a very expensive place to live. It costs more than the poverty level to live here. The current official poverty measure was developed in the mid-1960s by Molly Orshansky, a staff economist at the Social Security Administration. Poverty thresholds were derived from the cost of a minimum food diet multiplied by 3 to account for other family expenses. So what are the possible problems with that measure, with using food, the cost of food multiplying by 3 as a measure of poverty? Any ideas? Sure. Doesn't take into account housing costs, right? That's a really big one.
And transportation costs.
Transportation costs. What if costs of food, housing, other basic needs go up faster than food prices, right? So you see a disconnect between poverty level and what it actually costs for someone to live. And I just want to put up a chart really quickly to show you what that looks like. Let me find it. I got too many charts. Okay, I'm gonna skip that. For a family of 4, the poverty level in the United States is $25,000 approximately. Okay? So that's 100% of poverty. When we're talking about people impoverished in the United States, in Montgomery County, anywhere in the United States, we're talking about if a family's household income is below $25,000 and they have 4 people in that house, then they are in poverty. Okay? So let me come in closer and talk about Montgomery County. Montgomery County is, depending on how it's defined, one of the richest counties in the United States. It's ranked as high as 12th or 13th recently in median household income in the US among all counties. Yet, we have persistent poverty in certain areas of the county. So let me walk you through this map. This is a map I made using 2016 census tract data. I'm working on the 2017 update. It won't be much different than this. Any area of the county that doesn't have a pink or reddish coloring is an area below the median poverty rate for the county, which at the time this map was made was 6.9%. Okay, so if 6.9% or less than 6.9% of the households in a given census tract fell below the poverty threshold, there'd be no coloring. For census tracts where the poverty rate was between the county median and the US median of 15.2%, that's this light color. Okay, so higher than the county median, lower than the US median. The dark red are census tracts in Montgomery County that have higher poverty rates than the national average. Okay? Yes, we have places that have deep poverty in Montgomery County. And in fact, there's a tract right here that has a poverty rate of about 30%. That tract is just south of Leisure World in Aspen Hill, not that far from here. The reason why that tract has such concentration of households who are poor is because there's 3 major affordable housing complexes within that triangle. Poverty is concentrated within the county where there's affordable housing. And it's different in terms of demographics than we might think, and I'm going to run through that in just a moment. So the places that have the deepest poverty are around Tacoma Park, Silver Spring area, Aspen Hill, and southern Germantown, northern Gaithersburg. There's a particularly sort of deep pocket of poverty right around Gaithersburg High School. So it gives you a sense. So the places that are wealthier are the places that are not colored in. Potomac, Chevy Chase, Bethesda, Olney are the wealthiest places in the county. One of the census tracts in Montgomery County has a median household income 10 times as high as the lowest census tract in the county. So what this tells you is not only where poverty is, but what the disparity looks like in the county in terms of incomes and opportunity. The New York Times recently had a story about economic opportunity. I don't know if anyone saw it, but if you did and you plotted it on top of this, the places where people lack opportunity correspond directly with the highest poverty rate census tracts are. And there are reasons for that we'll get into in a little bit. But I want to share a few statistics, if I might, regarding poverty in this county. So there's some assumptions, like in the factfulness data that I was showing you earlier about world poverty, about who's impoverished in Montgomery County. And I just want to sort of share who is in poverty. The poverty rate in the county for females is 7.7%, for males is 6.1%. Nearly 1 in 4 female head of household families with children under 18 years old has household income below the poverty threshold in Montgomery County. Yeah. Okay, so let me say that again. Nearly 1 in 4 female head of household families with children under 18 years old has household income below the poverty line.
The poverty threshold in Montgomery County is 25,000.
For a family of 4.
So it's, even though it's not adjusted for cost.
So we're talking, families of 4, you have a mom, a mother, single head of household family with 3 children under 18. Chances of having a household income below $25,000 are 1 in 4. Okay? Put another way, there are about between 5,000 and 6,000 families in Montgomery County with a female head of household family that are in poverty.
And the 25,000 figure is the national figure, no matter where you are.
Doesn't matter where you are.
So I'm going to ask this. If you have a question,
Yeah, sorry.
just call me over. Why is this not on? There we go.
There you go.
Because that way it gets in the recording.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. Race and ethnicity. The poverty rate for non-Latino whites is 3.6%. Okay? For Hispanic of any race, the rate is 11.1%. Okay? Non-Caucasians are 48% of the county's total population, but make up 70% of those below the poverty line. Okay? So people of color are disparately in poverty. Age. 9.4% of children live in households below the poverty level. 7.6% of seniors live in households below the poverty level. That's relatively low if you compare it to other places in the country for seniors. We do reasonably well with seniors here. Here's one of the most fascinating things to me. There's an assumption that diversity is associated with poverty in Montgomery County. I've heard this in many forums. I've even heard it from people working in human services. 58.6% of children in poverty in Montgomery County had at least one native-born parent. Okay? So what we're talking about is not new immigrant folks coming and being trapped in poverty necessarily in the county. We're talking about families where you had at least one parent born in the United States who had children here who are living in poverty. Right? 1/3 of all living in poverty in Montgomery County were born in Maryland. Another 28.9% are native born in the US or outside the US as a US citizen born abroad. Okay? So you put that together and you've got about 77% are US citizen born. 16% of those who didn't finish high school live in poverty. Only 2.7% of those with a bachelor's degree or more live in poverty. In terms of employment, more than 6,000 men and 11,500 women aged 16 or older were in the labor force and lived in a household earning less than the poverty level. Okay, so work doesn't necessarily mean you're not in poverty, because there's so many temporary jobs and so many part-time jobs and so many low-paying jobs. So about 24% of the people in poverty in Montgomery County actually are employed. I'm going to wrap this up. Interfaith Works. Yeah, we have about 71,000 people total in Montgomery County who live below the federal poverty line right now. And so the question is, what do you do to help those people lift themselves out of poverty and stay out? On their own, national statistics show that most families escape poverty temporarily within 5 years. The problem is they fall back down. So it winds up being a cycle in and out. A car breaks down, there's an illness, anything like that, people fall into poverty. So organizations like Interfaith Works, a Wider Circle, other organizations working in the community are absolutely important to helping families not go through that sort of cycle. And so what we do at my organization is essentially we do three things. We prevent people from falling through the safety net. So if someone's facing eviction, we help put together a community response of dollars to help make sure they stay in their home and they don't become homeless. We work with Pepco and other utilities to pay back utility bills and provide financial education coupled with that payment to ensure that people don't lose their utilities. Okay? The financial education part has resulted, in terms of evictions, in a 99% success rate in people remaining in their homes over a 12-month period following the financial support, and 100% success in preventing utility cutoff over a year. So that's the important part, teaching the skills. Okay? The second thing we do is stabilize. Housing is absolutely essential to families being able to live, meet their basic needs, but also be able to move forward economically. So we work with people experiencing homelessness. We work with people who are near homeless to stabilize them in permanent housing, subsidized housing when we can, so that they can pay what they can afford. 50% of renters in Montgomery County are. Sorry.
And we're not taking all the questions yet, just a consideration.
On the topic of affordable housing, I had a little conversation with someone last week who lives in a luxurious apartment, and she mentioned to me that there are subsidized apartments in the building, and she said, and I kind of resent that because I'm paying, such and such, and why should those people get, this bargain? I had no answer for that, except that, I know that, I know some of my friends live in those subsidized apartments, and I know something about that the county requires the developers to have some subsidized stuff, but I don't know what the policy is or the history is of subsidized apartment dwellings.
Okay, let me do that just a quick answer to that for now. There's a moderately priced dwelling unit requirement for new construction of residential units in Montgomery County. They're required until last year 12.5% of any apartments constructed to be affordable to those making 80% of area median income or above. So if market rate affordability is median income in the county, we're talking about $100,000. Okay, 80 per family yes. So a median moderately priced dwelling unit is affordable for folks who make $72,000 to $80,000 a year. The subsidies, in other words, it's not much of a subsidy. Housing Opportunity Commission units, which is the housing authority for the county, have deeper subsidies for some of their units where people pay 30% of their income towards their rent. And so if their income goes up, they pay more. If they don't have income, they pay less, obviously. But those programs provide some level of affordability for people to be able to live in buildings they couldn't otherwise live in. On an apartment by apartment basis within a building, I could see that resentment. But it's important to keep in mind the systemic issues within the county where we lack tens of thousands of affordable units of housing. So we have to provide, as a county, some ability for people to live here who are serving us in restaurants, who are making our coffees, who are doing the things here. Otherwise, they're commuting in from Prince George's County, from Frederick, and everywhere else. If we want to have an inclusive community where people can live and work in the same place, then we have to provide for that opportunity. That's what I would say. Let me just wrap up, and then we can get to a conversation. It's Interfaith Works. About 350 people on any given night live in some housing that we provide, ranging from the Women's Emergency Shelter. How many of you may have volunteered there this week? Thank you so much. Really appreciate your volunteering there, and I hope that was a great experience. And to an outreach, a day program center in Silver Spring called Progress Place that we operate with Shepherd's Table and Mobile Med that provides day services, vocational counseling, case management, medical support to people living on the streets, to transitional housing for women experiencing mental illness, to a home for women who are homeless in Aspen Hill, who have serious disabilities who will never leave there. It's essentially permanent housing to them, to permanent housing places around the county in scattered sites, where we provide case management to ensure that people can stay in their apartments, in their homes. So we do all of that to make sure that people can have that opportunity to be successful to the extent they can be and independent. And the final thing we do is skills, is empowerment. It's teaching people how to prepare for a job, what you need to understand to be successful in a career, preparing them for that, providing other skills, financial management, English language skills, all of the things that people need to lift themselves up. So, and we're focusing more and more on that because that's the answer to helping people out of poverty. It's not really helping them by pulling them up. It's really giving them the tools to pull themselves up. And so that's really what we do. We serve 16,000 people a year at Interfaith Works. It's a big operation. Yeah.
So, you guys have the mics. We'll come up here. Justin, can you raise the screen for us, please? Thank you.
Thanks, Sari.
Excellent. Come on. So we're just going to open it up for questions, and Lisa and Bill are going to hand the microphones around. So,
how can there be greater assistance for the poverty areas?
Yeah. One thing that's really important, and that's a great question, by the way, geographic disparity is one of the things we need to talk about a little bit. On the map that was up there of poverty by census tract in the county, you might have seen some purple stars on that map. Those purple stars were near the red areas and the pink areas. They were in the impoverished areas. Those are the locations of Interfaith Works service, our service locations. You have to bring services to where people live in order to help them. East County has been neglected terribly in terms of social services, economic opportunity, and all that. And there's a great effort underway right now at the county level to bring all kinds of supports and social services directly to the East County area. And I'm talking about east of 29, Route 29. Heavily African population area that has been economically disadvantaged for a very, very long time. So I think in answer to your question, it's vitally important that we as a county analyze where people live who are impoverished and bring supports to them rather than asking them to come to where those supports are located. That's what makes help accessible, and it makes it more attuned to what the community needs.
Shane, just a question here. So appreciate the overview of all the programs that you have through Interfaith Works. But I guess another question, one of the things we'll be talking about in these forums, I think, going through the spring is advocacy as well. Do you have any thoughts or suggestions in terms of our votes or our voice? Who should we be engaging with, like thinking of the county council or
Yes.
State officials? What thoughts do you have there?
I would start with the county folks, County Executive Elridge and members of the County Council. I think it's vitally important that faith leaders and faith community members are represented in those conversations as much as possible. I think that's been missing in the conversation largely. And you all are smart, engaged, connected, and can have a huge impact in the county. As we go into the next few months, how the county allocates resources will be debated in public forums. There have been a number of the county executives been hosting over the last couple of weeks. I believe there's one more next week. If you can attend, I encourage you to do so. You will hear what your neighbors are thinking about in terms of the priorities for the county. It's vitally important that people with privilege, and if you're here, you probably enjoy some privilege, speak out on behalf of those who enjoy less. And so, people like me, I testify all the time. It's really important to have people from the community joining us.
You got one back in the 42, Sarah.
So, we live in Montgomery County, and it has, as a county, many services that seem to be superior to those in almost any other place in the country I've been. But there are limitations, there are shortcomings. And so could you just elaborate on where sort of government bureaucracies in general fall short and where your organization steps in and needs to step in, and how that sort of dynamic works, how it
That's a great, wonderful question. Nonprofits do the work the government would otherwise have to do, and that's what we do. And so we step in. Government does things that require very large systems reasonably well. So distributing SNAP benefits, food stamps, direct cash payments to families with children. Those things where you don't have to do a lot of high touch relationship building with people. What they don't do well are the things that require human interaction and require more sophisticated and individualized attention. So helping people out of homelessness. Not so good at the government level, really good at the nonprofit level. The key is having enough resources to be able to address those issues. Skills training, providing that skill education. Montgomery College does a great job, and nonprofits tend to layer onto that, so we work together to build skills with folks. So, it is a collaboration between government and the nonprofit sector, and even corporations in the county. And what falls short is we do as much as we can with the resources we have in the county. I think that there needs to be greater alignment of resources to accomplish common goals. And I think there's some interest in making that happen right now with this new administration, and that is something that you all could think about advocating for. And what I mean by that is ensuring that we're establishing actual goals that move us towards helping people out of poverty. We should hold ourselves accountable as a county in terms of whether or not there are more people in poverty or not each year when the census numbers come out. If that poverty rate is going up, then we're failing in some way.
Great. Sarah, you had a question over here?
Yeah, I was just curious, to navigate the system when you're in poverty is very, very complicated. And what resources or where should somebody go? Because, some of them might not even have internet access, but it's a very complicated program, and it's very difficult to find some things out there. And I was wondering, how would you guide somebody?
Great. Well, there are a couple of ways right off the top of my head. 311 is the county's line for social service assistance. And so dial 311 like 911. You will access folks who can at least provide some of the navigation. You can also call Interfaith Works. We have a program called Connections that's designed exactly to do that navigation. So we have 2 bilingual case managers who will refer people to exactly where they need to go to get help, either at my organization or any other organization in the county that provides help.
So I'm going to ask a question here. I have so many, I'm trying to hold myself back, but one of them is, in terms of disparity between rich and poor, where is our county compared to other counties in the U.S.? Do you have that statistic?
I don't. There's and I've been trying to calculate, there's actually a way to calculate that.
Right. Okay, so
I don't know
we'll hold
the
that
answer.
question.
Okay.
And the other one I wanted to ask is, you said that you were talking about the wonderful work that Interfaith Works does. I also have a sense that in Montgomery County, there's a lot of interest in caring for the poor. Is that just are we, as a county, do we have a kind of an above average interest in poverty compared to other counties? I mean, is there a lot going on? It seems to me like there is. I feel like there's a ton of resources, but I don't know how to quantify that. Or
Yeah, I mean, my sense, I moved here from Seattle 6 years ago, and I've worked in other places around the country, so I have a little bit of a basis on for answering that. This is a very generous county. It just is a very generous county, and we have a lot of services, as many of you have noted. So I think there is a lot here that can be done. It isn't always well coordinated. That's my take on it. Not always well coordinated. There are a lot of efforts that are too disparate. They're not united with others, so that we have some duplication and some inefficiency because of that. And so I think that's important to note. But it is a generous county with a lot of things. Where we run into trouble, though, is around the really hard issues around equity and racism and things like that I know this congregation has talked about and is working on. That map of where people are who are impoverished in Montgomery County is a result of history of this county and how the county is developed. There were restrictive covenants associated with land and deeds in much of this county. You have Potomac. If you were Jewish, you couldn't live in certain subdivisions in Potomac. If you were black, you certainly couldn't. Silver Spring was a sundown city until the 1950s, where if you were black, you were very welcome to work there during the day, but you had to be out before sundown. And so you went across the bridge into, I'm going to get the town wrong,
Laytonsville?
It's not, anyway, sort of an all African American community nearby. That's it. No, Littonville, that's it. Thank you, Littonville. There was a slave breeding farm in Boyd's in the 1800s. And we know that from U.S. Census data. And it's now a teaching place called Button Farm. I encourage you to go there if you ever have the opportunity. We know that it was a breeding farm to sell slaves to the market in the South because of census data that showed when children were present on the farm and when they left. Okay? So the county has a legacy of land use and race that led to where affordable housing could be sited and where people could live. Most of those restrictions are gone. They're no longer here, but they've led to what we see in terms of geographic opportunity. Where you live in the county helps determine the opportunities you have in life, and that's not something that any of us believe should be the case. So by focusing more of what we do in the areas where there is less opportunity, what we hope to accomplish is not gentrification, because that would drive out the people we want to benefit, but really providing additional opportunity for people to thrive in starting businesses, in serving their own community in the way that they see most fit in terms of developing an economy. That's what we want. We want people who are living in lower income places to recognize that they can use their talents that we all have to help themselves and their community.
So I wanted to follow up on both those points. One, that Montgomery County is a generous county, and yet there still is this really stark disparity across the country. So how you define generosity, it seems like, isn't shifting the actual disparity. And I also, in conjunction with that, heard you talk about advocating. So thus, us with plenty advocating. But doesn't it really come down to the question Pam asked, which is, I can advocate and say I'm for helping people come out of poverty. But unless I'm willing to go to the zoning commission and say, I want my building to have units for affordable housing available. And so I guess I don't feel like I'm in a position, or I wouldn't even know where to go to advocate for something, because there's nothing that I know of right now that would personally affect or help to change the actual disparity in income, opportunity, or location. So it's both a personal thing and sort of a systemic thing. How do you really involve those two pieces if the person doesn't put a stake in it?
I think that's a great point. I don't have a great answer for you. Opportunities arise for advocacy, and I'm going to cite one that's probably really controversial, and so Westbard in Bethesda, really close, nearby, right? So there was a lot, the neighbors there, many of the neighbors there opposed the Westbard development, including many more affordable housing. And the arguments made against that included, more traffic headaches, not good access to transportation for people who are poor, those sorts of things. It's, depending on how you look at it, that's code for keeping people out that they don't want in the community. So the county is very generous, meaning people donate money and they donate their time, and that's real. It is wonderful because that's needed. But there's also a tremendous amount of NIMBYism that's preventing construction of affordable housing. So not in my backyard. Sorry. So not in my backyard. So, build it somewhere else. I'll support affordable housing as long as it's not in my neighborhood, right? So we can't have that. I mean, we can't. Dirt is really expensive in this county, particularly since we've set aside so much for the agricultural reserve, which I do think is a good thing, but still. We have to wrap our heads around the idea that we can advocate for continuing to have a livable, wonderful, welcoming community at the same time that we build greater density for those who need to live in our communities and serve us in those communities. They need to have the opportunities that we enjoy. So by protecting our lifestyles, there's a balancing act. We don't want to give up, but we also want others to have. And so where is that? By acknowledging in your testimony when you have an opportunity in talking with your neighbors or council or the county executive or anyone like that, that you understand that and that we as a county need to be able to do both of those things, then that's actually helping a lot. Most of the people on the county council and the new county executive want to do these things, but they need the support of the community. They do not need to feel like their job is endangered if they take a stand that is going to tick off some people.
We have a vision statement that I think I mentioned to you. And the third point, there's three points. Third point is that as a church, we're committing to facilitating more meaningful interactions across the socioeconomic spectrum. And so what you're saying, I think, is like we as a church have committed to not, I've never heard that expression before, but like the not in my backyard kind of thing. Mm-hmm. We've actually committed to saying we want to, it's not like us helping the poor, it's like we want to kind of bridge that kind of the relational gap in that way. Let's take one more question, then I have one last one I'd like to ask. Sarah, did you want to?
Okay.
Unfortunately, poverty is generation after generation after generation. What requirements are we as a community putting on them to sort of help themselves as far as education, skills, so that it doesn't happen from generation to generation?
All right. I think that's a brilliant question. I might think about, in answering, I might take it a little bit different than you're thinking. I think we have to have high expectations of everybody in our community. There are people in our community who, because of disability or mental illness, cannot help themselves, right? And social work, in terms of help, it should be focused on those folks. Most families in our community who are struggling in poverty have talent. They have drive. They lack opportunity and they lack social connections. So what I mean by that is, you and I probably had access to more to be able to invest in our lives because of our parents and because of our situations growing up than most. We certainly had great social connections. Yeah, most of the folks in this room, I'm guessing, probably went to college. College creates amazing networks of people who can help you early in your career. We have all benefited from others. What people in poverty lack are access to financial capital to invest in their families and social connections to help them move forward. And so to the extent that you as a church can engage a meaningful dialogue with people who are less advantaged, not in a way where you're saying, oh, I'm going to help you, right, directly, but in a way where you understand better what their talents are and you can connect them in such a way that they can use those, that's really beneficial. And that's not something where you are treating them as a lesser. You're treating them as an equal who hasn't had the same opportunities. That's what really helps families and individuals move forward. It lets them capitalize on what they already have but haven't been able to actualize.
Wow. So I want to say, I think I can speak on behalf of most of us, but for me, this is like an introductory course to something I feel like I need to learn much more about. And I think we need to have you come back again at some point, and we need to figure out how to take this conversation further. We're out of time, unfortunately.
Thank you.
So any final things that you'd like to call us to or invite us to consider before we adjourn?
One quick thing. So thanks very much for the welcome. I feel the interest in this room and to do good and to help others, and it comes through. Follow your heart and use your mind. You know, to engage with the women at the Women's Center. If you have an opportunity to serve food there, don't just serve them food. Sit down and have dinner with them and talk and learn about how some of them have PhDs or working for the federal government but experienced, there's an accident or a health issue. Start to understand that there's no real difference between people who are poor and those of us who are not. Yeah, everybody has hopes and dreams. So follow your hopes and dreams in helping others. That's what I'd say. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, guys. God bless. Thank you.